Hello and welcome back to some Warhammer 3 blog post breaking down action. We finally got a look at the full Cathay roster we're getting on launch, and while we may not have any stats or proper battle footage, there's more than enough here to speculate exactly how every single unit works. There's a lot to get through, so let's dive right in. First things first, our legendary lords. Of course we've seen these guys before, but let's quickly go through them anyway. First up we have Miao Ying, the Storm Dragon. She likely has a couple of auras to buff her own troops and debuff enemies, likely with leadership due to the reverence her troops view her with, and the fear she imposes even on chaos. On top of this, she is also a powerful mage that of course has the ability to transform between her dragon and human forms at will, depending on what the situation calls for. Both her and her brother are also masters of something called elemental winds, which basically boils down to the more spellcasters you have in an army, the more powerful your casts are going to be. On top of this, she also has access to a mix of the lore of Yin and life. The new lore of Yin is a little niche, with abilities that can reflect enemy missiles, raise the ghosts of the dead, grant stealth, and mysterious removal of foes. Their spells are called Storm of Shadows, Cloak of Jet, Missile Mirror, Blossom Wind, Talons of Night, and Ancestral Warriors. She also puts everyone she fights at an immediate disadvantage because dragons just fail like that. There's no mention of how she is in actual combat in human form, so I'd assume she is a powerful spellcaster whilst human and can become the dragon to slaughter in melee at the cost of some casting capability. Our other legendary lord is of course Zhao Ming the Iron Dragon. Strangely, the first thing we will learn from his profile is the Cathay faction mechanic for battle. All units in the roster are either part of Yin or Yang. When they are close to units of the opposite, they gain enhanced stats and abilities. Yang units become more defensive and harder to take down, whilst Yin units attack faster and harder. And of course, any lord nearby enhances this synergy. Of course, like his sister, Zhao can transform to and from dragon and human forms at will, and he is also a powerful spellcaster. However, he chooses to utilise the laws of Yang and Metal. The brand new lore of Yang focuses on buffing allies with leadership and disrupting enemies with walls of force, as well as mighty explosions, though these will be fewer and further between, as they are much more expensive. Their spells are called Jade Shield, Dragon's Breath, Wall of Wind and Fire, Stone Ground Stance, Might of Heaven Nerf, and Constellation of the Dragon. He also has the ability to grant some of his units enhanced and nearly invulnerable armor for a short duration, and from his description, he sounds very similar to his sister, aside from the opposite magic, so cast spells, transform and do dragon things, before looping back for more magic. Onto their generic lords now. First up we have the dragon-blooded Shugonen warriors. These are members of the celestial dragon bloodline, which naturally causes them to have powerful abilities in combat, magic and leadership. They have a choice from the laws of Yang and Yin, and can choose to ride a warhorse or a jade longma, which are those beautiful green flying horses we keep seeing. Unfortunately, as far as I can see, they cannot transform into dragons despite their bloodline, so we're limited to being decent in combat, really good at magic, and providing fantastic leadership. Our other generic lord type is the Lord Magistrate. While not the best fighters in the world, they are expert commanders who can inspire and direct their troops better than any other. They can still hold their own against most things, but fighting one-on-one isn't their primary purpose. They have the choice of mounting a warhorse or a sky lantern, the latter of which keeps them out of ground-based harm's way and provides them with a lovely view of the battle below. Their true power comes from their ability to enhance the harmony bonuses of the army more than any other lord. Moving on to the Cathay heroes now. First up we have alchemists. Aside from magic, alchemy is also a practiced art in the Cathay lands, and they are a particular favourite of Zhao Ming, the Iron Dragon, but they are available nationwide despite their sometimes controversial practices. Their potions grant them powers from the lore of metal, as well as giving them unique buffs to apply to themselves or nearby allies, granting massive damage or defense depending on the situation. They can also mount a warhorse. We also have access to the Astromancer. These are the only truly accepted sorcerers of the Cathayan lands who practice the lore of heavens. They have two mounts, the warhorse and the Wu Jing war compass, which we'll cover a bit more later, but for now, all you need to know is, if you have magic, this thing makes it better. Moving on to melee infantry, first up we have the Peasant Long Spearmen, the cheapest infantry in the faction, similar to the Spearmen at Arms from Bretonnia, though much more numerous and slightly more trained and willing to fight. All melee units are Yang aligned and are granted increased leadership and melee defense when close to a Yin unit. They of course gain a very small amount of bonus versus large, as well as a charge defense when bracing, which makes them into a decent line holder to absorb a charge. They will, however, likely run out of every single battle, but what can you really expect? Next up we have Jade Warriors, and these are the real meat of the Cathay army, and will be making up much of the mid-game frontline troops. They have two variants, Sword and Shield, and Halberds, and they are expertly trained to hold the line versus ogres, chaos, and pretty much anything the enemy can throw them, so expect them to have high leadership and melee defense to withstand any onslaught. They can also adopt a defensive stance, which makes them much harder to charge and take out. Could this mean we're finally getting different stances and formations in a Warhammer game? God, I hope so. The longer they're in this stance and holding off the enemy, the better it gets with increases to charge resistance and armor, so set them up and leave them there. While the halberds lack shields for ranged attacks, they are still super tough and can hold the line arguably better than swords due to their expert charge defense. Our final melee infantry unit is the Celestial Dragon Guard, and these are the best of the best Cathay melee troops. Their presence alone grants buffs to the leadership of nearby units, and they wield halberds and can take on armoured units as well as they can large and even massive troops, so cavalry isn't even a challenge. They are still extremely defensive and prefer to hold the line for as long as it takes for the ranged units of the army to do the actual killing. The only downside to them is their unit size, as Celestial Guard are just that elite, and there can only be a few of them per unit to ensure the Celestial Dragon is kept safe at all times. Moving on to missile infantry, first things first, we have the Peasant Archers. Making a return from their popular Bretonnian tour, these guys are your cheapest possible ranged units. As with all ranged units, they are units of yin, they are expendable, and their damage is meagre, and their leadership is pitiful, but they are numerous and cheap, and will offer a decent deterrent to anything weaker willed on the enemy side. Next up, Iron Hail Gunners. These are lightly armoured gunners with devastating but short-range blunderbusses. They pack a massive armour-piercing punch inside of a short range that can fell even the most heavily armoured of enemies. They are, however, totally useless if caught out, so please keep them safe at all costs. Next up we have Crane Gunners. These are the Warplock Jezzail lookalikes that we've seen in previous trailers. They look this way due to the sheer unwieldiness of the weapons themselves. One holds the trigger and scope to aim and fire, whilst the other supports the tower shield, which provides stability for the end of the rifle, which also provides them with surprisingly good defense versus ranged, but totally pants defense in melee. They will outrange basically anything in the game that isn't artillery, and their AP rounds will shred through enemy units from across the map with deadly precision. This is also 2 people for the price of 1 unit, and as the blog does well say, that is a bargain. Next up we have the Jade Crossbowmen. Quite like the Jade Warriors, the Crossbowmen are the backbone of the Cathay ranged armies. They have 2 variants, with and without shields, and they are pretty much what you'd expect from crossbows. Decent damage over a decent range, but nothing crazy in either department. They are, however, quite proficient in melee should the need arise, with high armour and decent stats to take on weaker troops with relative ease. Our final ranged infantry units are the Celestial Dragon Crossbowmen. These are an entirely different type of crossbow unit. They utilise repeating crossbows with armour-piercing bolts to quickly tear through enemy lines from a range. They may not have the same range or power as the Crane Gunners, but they do excel in other areas such as toughness with armour and shields, and melee stats that cause them to be as close to a hybrid unit as Cathay tends to get. Moving on now to Cavalry and Chariots. First things first, the Peasant Horsemen. Pretty much what you'd expect. Super fast, vanguard deployment, and totally piss weak in combat, and only want to be used as scouts or to chase down something already retreating. Please don't use them against actual units, they will die. Next up we have Jade Lancers. They are again the Jade backbone to the Cathay Cav. They are slower but heavy hitting cav with the ability to deal extreme damage whilst charging. They also have decent defensive stats, heavy armour, and shields to protect themselves from damage. Next up, Great Longma Riders. These are elite flying cav that can take on pretty much anything that gets in their way, from enemy flyers to ground troops that they fix their gaze on. They have massive speed as well as a powerful charge, and their armour is unmatched in its weight. As long as they keep charging, there are a few things that can really stop them. Coming to the one and only construct, the Terracotta Sentinel, they're called upon to defend Cathay in times of need, and are the most powerful settlement defences available to the faction. Does this mean they will be summonable in times of need, like these stone dudes from the Deathly Hallows Part 2, because that would in fact be pretty rad. They lay waste to anything they come into contact with, and cause terror to all it faces. There really isn't anything they can't take on, from massive enemies to entire troops of infantry. Moving on now to the Flying War Machines, we have the Sky Lantern. Not only do they often house lords, as previously mentioned, they are also crowned by 4 crane gunners kept safe inside the armoured basket below and left to freely fire at anything that enters their sights. They are obscenely slow, but provide a ton of vision, which allows them to spot hidden units from a ways off and keep your army informed and encouraged. Our other flying unit is the Sky Junk. This huge warship carries great guns that lob shrapnel and explosives at oncoming enemies and are capable of obliterating entire battle lines. They also carry bombs that they can drop onto unsuspecting enemies below for devastating damage. They are still aggressively slow, and once they are out of ammo, they are truly useless, but when they are in action, they really do slaughter. Coming on to the final category now, the Artillery and War Machines. First up, the Grand Cannon. Carried around by Oxers, the Grand Cannons launch flaming projectiles that pack a huge punch versus whatever they hit. Be it infantry, monsters, or even walls, all will fall when focus fired. And despite the size, they're actually quite manoeuvrable thanks to the speedy Oxers on the front. The Wujing War Compass is one of the oddest units in the roster and in the game, to be honest. This is basically the Cathay version of the Corpse Cart, but it's better. It is directly imbued with the power of the heavens and causes meteors and lightning to be summoned in its wake. Mounted spellcasters are enhanced when aboard this thing, alongside it being somehow decent in combat. And of course, it provides some boost to the winds of magic because it's a Corpse Cart, but way better. And our final unit is the Fire Rain Rocket. This is the ultimate ranged weapon in the roster, and it's basically their version of the Hellstorm rocket battery. Their speciality is large clumps of enemy units where their slightly inaccurate damage can hit hard with every single launch. It does have worse range than the Great Cannon, but has a bunch more damage. Also, fun fact, both this and the Great Cannon have large support teams, making them much harder to wipe out when flanked, giving you extra time to come rescue them. And there we go, that is everything that we can see on the Cathay roster for now. Hopefully soon we'll see some more info about their opponents in the form of the Siege Demonic Hordes, and hopefully we'll get some goddamn gameplay one of these days. Believe me, I want to play it as much as you want to see it. If you enjoyed this video at any point, then do be sure to leave it a like, and if you want to see more content like this, I'm going to be breaking down every single bit of news we get in the build up to Warhammer 3, and of course doing all the guides to Warhammer 3 as soon as I can. Then be sure to subscribe to the channel, hit that bell thing, so that you never miss a single video. If you want to support the channel, then be sure to check out COLONELDAMNEDERS.store. We've got all sorts of absolutely copyright safe designs, so if you want to check them out, there is a link in the description down below, and I'd really appreciate it. I'd also like to take this time to thank all supporters of the channel, both here on the YouTube membership system, as well as over on Twitch, and of course on Patreon. It really does mean the world to me that you guys want to support the channel in such a direct way. One more thank you to every single one of you for watching, and for now, I've been Colonel Damneders, and I will see you next turn.